بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. This is متن نخبة الفكر, and inshallah ta'ala this will consider our first session بإذن الله عز وجل, where I have made some slides. Last week I was too lazy to make some slides. طيب, Sheikh Muhammad Awal, you want to read or you're busy?
I can do it إن شاء الله.
طيب, جزاك الله خير.
إن شاء الله. أبدأ إن شاء الله.
ابدأ شيخ.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. قال الشيخ رحمه الله تعالى ابن حجر العسقلاني في متنه نخبة الفكر في مصطلح أهل الأثر.
نخبة
الحمد
الفكر.
لله الذي نخبة الفكر في مصطلح أهل
صحيح.
الحمد لله الذي لم يزل عليما قديرا، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد الذي أرسله إلى الناس كافة بشيرا ونذيرا، وعلى آل محمد وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد، فإن التصانيف في اصطلاح أهل الحديث قد كثرت وبسطت واختصرت، فسألني بعض الإخوان أن ألخص له المهم من ذلك، فأجبته إلى سؤاله رجاء الاندراج في تلك المسالك. فأقول الخبر إما
طيب.
أن يكون
طيب,
له
جزاك الله
طرق.
خير. Is my voice clear شيخنا؟
Yes.
طيب, this is the introduction, this is the مقدمة, and we kind of spoke about it last week. There's no need to speak. However, just to say that Ibn Hajar is one of the latest scholars, and therefore this is one of the things that would make this matan valuable, because he came after all of this work. And we mentioned four stages of ilm al-hadith, one of them at the time of the Prophet and the Sahaba, and the Tabi'een, and then the time where the rulings of Hadith were spread amongst the books of ulama such as Shafi'i and Ali ibn al-Madini and other books and other authors. And then later on, where Ilm al-Hadith became in one curriculum or one field, and a book was compiled only about Ilm al-Hadith itself, methodology. And we mentioned the Rama Hormuzi and Al-Hakim and others. And then after that, some sort of tahveeb and some sort of يعني adding terms and expanding the work of the early scholars. And here Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala contributes to that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon him. طيب, let's go to now this. If you open the matan of Nukhbat al-Fikr, this is the first thing that you would see Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala saying. He says فأقول الخبر إما أن يكون له طرق بلا عدد معين أو مع حصر بما فوق الاثنين أو بهما أو بواحد. Um, this is the first sentence is where Ibn Hajar rahimahullah wraps up four terminologies together, and then after wrapping them up and mentioning them all together, he spreads them and he would mention them one by one. And this is called al-laf wal-nashr. Al-laf is to mention a few things together, and then al-nashr is to spread them into the definitions one by one, and it's used in the Quran and perhaps in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and it's used in the Arabic language. And also the opposite is used. For example, an-nashr wal-laf, to mention a few terms and then gather them all together in one sentence at the end. So Ibn Hajar here in this sentence, what he says, basically, he says that al-khabar, which are the reports, are four things. إما أن يكون له طرق بلا عدد معين, many ways without a specific number, أو مع حصر بما فوق الاثنين, or that we can limit the ways but they are more than two chains, أو بهما, or that there is only two ways for the hadith, أو بواحد, or that there is only one way for the hadith. Then when he spreads them and he speaks about them individually, he says فالأول المتواتر المفيد للعلم اليقيني بشروطه. المتواتر المفيد للعلم, يعني that conveys knowledge, يقيني, certainty, بشروطه, with the conditions that is mentioned by the scholars. والثاني المشهور وهو المستفيض على رأي. This is what is called المشهور. والثالث العزيز وليس شرطا للصحيح خلافا لمن زعمه. We're going to speak about this sentence shortly. والرابع الغريب. So one way غريب, two ways عزيز, more than two مشهور, and then more than that what fulfills the condition of متواتر is not مشهور anymore, is متواتر. Now, we said previously, if you remember, that this is the opinion of Ibn Hajar. However, many other scholars like Ibn Salah, Ibn Manda, Ibn Kathir, and other scholars, they consider mashhur to include two and three. Not only two isnad, two narrations, also three is included to be mashhur. And sorry, also three included with Aziz. Sorry, I apologize. So these scholars, they consider Aziz not only two ways, also three ways they consider it to be Aziz. And for them, Mashhur, it's what has more than three reports. However, let's stick to the definition of Ibn Hajar. So what has two narrations is Aziz, and what has three or more is Mashhur. But the first one, many ways without a specific number, and that is Al-Mutawatir. المتواتر لغة يعني linguistically is from تتابع. يعني for example I say تواترت الأخبار, that والله something happened in Pakistan وتواترت الأخبار, and news were flowing, were coming one after another. Or they say تواترت الإبل, يعني the camels are coming one after another. This is لغة. And اصطلاحا they say ما يخبر به عدد كبير لا يمكن تواطؤهم على الكذب. يعني what is narrated by a huge number of people that reasonably, logically speaking, you cannot say all of them are conspiring, all of them are liars. And this is يعني from your daily life. يعني something happened in Sydney, for example, or in America, and there is a huge number of people that are telling you we saw it, we heard it, and that is reasonably you cannot reject it. You cannot say I don't believe there is North Korea unless I visit it. No, there is people that testified, and there is photos, and these photos are conveyed to you by people who said and testified that this is a photo of North Korea. So reasonably you see yourself compelled to believe in such. This is the definition. The conditions of mutawatir the scholars mention, they say يخبر به عدد كبير من غير حصر يحصل به العلم الضروري. Some scholars they put limits for mutawatir, 3, 7, 10, according to قرائن, to indications. الصحيح أن المتواتر لا حصر له. There is no specific number for the mutawatir. And we mentioned that for the scholars of hadith, they are to judge when the hadith becomes mutawatir. They are the people of this field. So the hadith would be mashhur, would increase in chains until it become mutawatir. However, there is a part of mutawatir that you see yourself compelled to believe in, and this is the logical, reasonable mutawatir. Inshallah ta'ala will give examples of that. The second condition of mutawatir, أن يخبروا عن علم لا ظن. يعني this huge number of people that are conveying a message, they're not conveying probabilities. Maybe we saw something. Maybe something happened. لا. They all convey something عن علم. علم here means certainty, knowledge. يعني they already know. لا ظن, not a doubt. The third condition أن يخبروا عن محسوس لا مجرد إدراك عقلي. يعني to convey something, a news, a report that was gained through our sense, not through our comprehension or merely يعني عقلي إدراك, عقلي comprehension. يعني for example, you can't say someone narrated to me that number 3 is bigger than number 1. This is عقلي. This is something that humanity agree upon based on the necessary knowledge that we have. You can't say, for example, that a whole watermelon is bigger than half of it. No, this is not included. It has to be something that is mahsus. You see, or you smell, or you hear, or you touch, for example. طيب, number 4, استيفاء الشروط في جميع الطبقات. For these three conditions to be in every single طبقة, in every single level. طيب, the types of mutawatir. Some scholars they go on mentioning multiple types of mutawatir. However, let's stick to two main types that are لفظي and معنوي. لفظي, something that is narrated to us exactly the same way. So, for example, من كذب علي متعمدا فليتبوأ مقعده من النار. Whoever lies upon me intentionally, then let him seek his seat in hellfire. This has been narrated to us by, some said 100 and some said 200 Sahaba. So definitely more than 100 Sahabi. And it's exactly the same wording. Ma'nawi is where the meaning is narrated to you, not the exact words. So, for example, the Prophet ﷺ raising his hand in dua, the Sahaba will narrate multiple stories, multiple incidents of the Prophet, speaking about different topics. In them, you would see that the Sahaba would say, and the Prophet raised his hand in dua. So he didn't intend to convey that part of the hadith. Rather, it's distracted from multiple hadith, and it became mutawatir after that, that the Prophet did raise his hand in dua. And also the hadith that speak about believers seeing Allah Azza wa Jal. It's through different incidents, different occasions, different contexts. However, at the end, we distract that it's mutawatir, that people will be seeing the Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, المتواتر لغة is التتابع أن يخبر به عدد لا يمكن تواطؤهم على الكذب. These are the few conditions of المتواتر, and these are the types. Some scholars add a type, a third type, for example, المتواتر العملي, what is narrated to us through the actions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And يعني in this limited time that we have, let me ask you a quick question. If someone says, I only believe in the Quran, I don't believe in the Sunnah, and you tell him, طيب, how do you pray? And he says that I pray learning from my forefathers or inheriting it from my forefathers. What do you think the most suitable answer is? Because now his premise is that Quran is the only source of guidance, and I don't need anything else. Even the Prophet himself is not an authority to tell me what the Quran says. There's some of the Sunnah rejectors. To save some time, يعني, we really don't have time. It's 9:49 already. The logical answer would be your premise was that the Quran is sufficient. And now you're relying on a second source, and that is inheriting the action from your forefathers to prove an act of worship, a ibadah that you think Allah wants you to do. And obviously, many Sunnah rejectors, they would go on to say that, okay, let's make up our own prayer. They would go to the verses and they make up their own salah. Moving on, so this is al-mutawatir. We're going to speak a bit about al-mutawatir later, inshallah ta'ala. Then the second type that the Shaykh mentioned is mashhur, that is more than two, less than tawatur. يعني less than fulfilling the conditions of mutawatir. لغة مشهور. Now you have to be careful that the early scholars, when they use the word mashhur, they don't mean exactly this istilah. Mashhur can mean something that is known. It can be weak, it can be authentic, it can be mutawatir, it can be distorted, موضوع. It's مشهور linguistically. Over here, what we're dealing with is مشهور الاصطلاحي. What is narrated by two or more chains, but less than tawatur. This is obviously the opinion of Ibn Hajar and some other scholars. And we said the other scholars said what is narrated by three, by more than three, not more than two. طيب. The third that the Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned, he said, وَالثالث العزيز وليس شرطا للصحيح خلافا لمن زعمه. He said the third is aziz, and it's not a condition for authentication, unlike who claimed it. And the Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala bin Hajar, he explains this matan, Nukhbatul Fikar, in his book, which is called نزهة النظر في شرح نخبة الفكر. And he says in this book, in his book نزهة النظر, in the commentary, he says, وهو أبو علي الجبائي من المعتزلة. And Abu Ali al-Jubba'i from Jubba, it's a city in Ahwaz, unfortunately, it's from the Mu'tazila. وإليه يومئ كلام الحاكم أبي عبد الله في علوم الحديث. So some of the Abu Ali al-Jubba'i, he claimed that minimum requirement for authentic report is to be narrated by two. And also Al-Hakim indicated to that. However, the correct opinion is that this is not a requirement. And you can see that the Sahaba, it's mutawatir of them to accept a hadith al-fard, hadith that is narrated by one. And also the early scholars of hadith, they would mention and rely on hadith that is narrated by that are gharib, that are fard. that are less than Aziz. For example, Hadith إنما الأعمال بالنيات, that was narrated by four individuals, and in being gharib by Umar al-Khattab, and then Alqama, and then Taymi, uh, Taymi or Tamimi, I forgot the narrator, and then Yahya al-Ansari. طيب, then the Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala says, so the first one was متواتر, and then مشهور, and then عزيز, and then غريب. غريب should be number 4, but I made a mistake here, I put number 3. طيب, الغريب يا إخوة, he says الغريب ثم الغرابة. I'm gonna skip this part. I'm gonna skip this part. I'm gonna go to these ones that I highlighted. ثم الغرابة إما أن تكون في أصل السند أو لا. فالأول الفرد المطلق، والثاني الفرد النسبي، ويقل إطلاق الفردية عليه. He says that there is two types of gharib. Gharib that has one isnad, one narration only. One of them is fard mutlaq, that from the start of the sanad, yani after the sahabi, and also there is different opinions whether the sahabi is included or not. However, after the sahabi, so the sahabi narrates and there is only one tabi'i narrating from him. This is fard mutlaq. This is ultimate fardiyya, ultimate gharib. And then fardun nisbi, that is from after the tabi'i. So if there is after the tab in the middle of the chain or the end of the chain, there is one narrator. This is fard nisbi, or in some aspects of the report. For example, there is one report that is narrated by Iraqis only, and it's not known by other than them. This can be called relatively strange or fard or gharib. Or something that is narrated by certain يعني certain narration or certain form. This can be some aspect of it can be gharib, so it's relatively gharib. It's not ultimately gharib. And the scholars in general, they would lean towards some hadith that are well known, hadith that are well circulated. This is what they want because they are more likely to be authentic. However, the more gharib the hadith is, the more careful they are with dealing with those reports. That doesn't mean a report that is gharib that has one chain cannot be authentic. Rather, one of the most authentic hadith that we have is narrated by Umar, إنما الأعمال بالنيات, and it's the hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, start with, and then the hadith in, the Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala starts 40 Nawawis with, and the scholars have accepted this hadith. طيب, here he says, وكلها سوى الأول آحاد. He said that all of these three, except for the first, is ahad. Ahad. So now he's dividing it into ahad and mutawatir. طيب, what is the definition of ahad? They say that ahad is what doesn't fulfill the conditions of mutawatir. That can be an easy definition of ahad. And remember that these categories that we have here, mutawatir, mashhur, aziz, especially mashhur, aziz, gharib, has nothing to do with the process of authentication. Yes, mashhur, if it's authentic, it would add more credit to it. Gharib, we are more careful with it, but it doesn't have anything to do with authentication. Aslan, this kind of dividing the hadith into mutawatir and ahad did not exist in the early generation. So ahad, he says, وَفِيهَا الْمَقْبُولُ وَالْمَرْدُودُ. In it, there is maqbul and mardud, accepted and rejected, in terms of authentication. لتوقف الاستدلال بها على البحث عن أحوال رواتها دون الأول. He says because we need to do استدلال and بحث عن أحوال الرواة. We need to study the narrators, basically. However, المتواتر, you feel like compelled to accept it. Then he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, and this is one of the most crucial parts of this matan, or this introduction. وقد يقع فيها ما يفيد علم النظري بالقرائن على المختار. العلم النظري, العلم الضروري that he mentioned for the متواتر, or العلم اليقيني here he said, is the necessary knowledge that he compelled to accept without really digging into the narration and studying it too much. العلم النظري comes from the nazar. Nazar is to see and look and investigate. However, al-ilm means knowledge that is certain. So he says وقد يقع فيها ما يفيد العلم النظري بالقرائن على المختار. يعني by default a hadith that is ahad is ظني الثبوت. ظن is probability, most likely. However, if it's authentic يعني. However, we can have قرائن that makes it certainty, that raises it to certainty. بالقرائن, and then he says على المختار, indicating to the fact that there is khilaf. And this khilaf is not amongst the Sahaba nor the early scholars of the Salaf. Rather, this khilaf, for example, Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, his opinion, as he discloses, is that every hadith ahad is dhanni thubut. And Ibn Hajar rahimahullah ta'ala, he opposes Nawawi in his understanding, and he says, no, if it has qara'in, then it's accepted, and it can raise to certainty, and this is mutawatir from the Sahaba. It's mutawatir that the Sahaba acted by ahad hadith, and they took it, and the early scholars, they dealt with this ahad hadith with, relying on them with certainty, and attributed them to the Prophet ﷺ, and they didn't differentiate between ahad and mutawatir, this differentiation. It's an innovation to differentiate like that. Whether it's يعني أن تقول لا يفيد العلم لا يفيد العلم بل يفيد الظن, they say. So here the Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala, he يعني to conclude, we say that what conveys certain knowledge is, number one, the mutawatir that does not require looking into its evidence. You're compelled to believe in it. So, for example, the fact that Allah sent Muhammad ﷺ to Mecca, the fact that there is war in Gaza, for example, it's mutawatir. You feel yourself compelled to believe in it. Second, mutawatir that is a result of following its evidence and looking into it and some sort of investigation. So, for example, the Prophet ﷺ raising his hands in dua. This is mutawatir through the narrations that we have achieved to have. طيب, this third that we Ahl Sunnah affirm is that ahad hadith, which is paired with qara'in, is also conveys certain knowledge. Yes, it's not, we don't say it's mutawatir, but we say احتف بالقرائن. It conveys certain knowledge. Now, the scholars of Ahl Sunnah, يعني historically, they gave a lot of cases for ahad hadith being paired with qara'in. Some of the qara'in that they mentioned is, for example, that the scholars of the Sahaba or the early scholars, they act by this hadith. They take it, they accept it, they circulate it. Some of the qara'in is that to be narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. And the Ummah adopts and accepts Bukhari and Muslim. These are some of the qara'in. The scholars mention other qara'in, other indicative evidences. I don't know what is exactly qara'in in English. So here, يعني when you read the text, we want to have a clear understanding. It says فيقول الخبر إما يكون له طرق بلا عدد معين أو مع حصر بما فوق الاثنين أو بهما أو بواحد. This is a bit confusing, but when you understand that it's wrapped up and he's going to spread it after that, it will become easy. And then he says وكلها سوى الأول آحاد وفيها المقبول والمردود لمتوقف الاستدلال بها على البحث عن أحوال رواتها دون الأول وقد يقع فيها ما يفيد العلم النظري بالقرائن على المختار. طيب, in what is remaining of the session, if anyone wants to leave, they can. I would be reading and sharing with you some of what Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala says about the issue of using the hujjiyah of hadith al-ahad. طيب, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala in الصواعق المرسلة and يعني other scholars as well of Ahl Sunnah, they would speak of this topic. So, for example, Ibn al-Qayyim here, he details in terms of